The first time she spoke the words out loud, the room went silent. Not the dramatic kind of silence you hear in movies, but the uncomfortable kind, the kind where you can almost hear people holding their breath. For decades, the story around Rob Reiner had been clear, polished, almost untouchable. Legendary director, cultural icon, a voice behind some of the most beloved films ever made. But sitting across from a small group of listeners, his daughter finally confirmed something that had lingered in the shadows for years. And it wasn't about fame, it was about what fame took. Growing up, she learned early that her last name meant something before she ever did. On school playgrounds, adults didn't ask what she liked or what she dreamed of becoming. They asked what her father was working on next. At home, the walls were lined with awards and scripts, reminders that greatness lived just beyond her bedroom door. To the outside world, it looked magical. But magic, she would later admit, often comes at a cost. And the cost was silence. She remembers waiting for him to come home after late-night editing sessions, waiting for weekends that never quite belonged to the family, waiting for conversations that were always cut short by a ringing phone. As a child, she told herself this was normal, that important people had important work. But as the years passed, the waiting started to feel heavier. What happens to a child when admiration turns into distance? And how long can you tell yourself you're fine before the truth starts asking to be heard? There was one night, she recalls vividly. She was young, standing in a doorway, clutching a drawing she'd made just for him. He was on the phone, pacing, voice intense, completely absorbed. She stood there for several minutes before quietly walking away. He never noticed. Years later, she would say that moment wasn't traumatic on its own, but it became symbolic. A quiet metaphor for a childhood spent on the margins of someone else's legacy. From the outside, the Reiner household looked warm, intellectual, progressive. Dinner table conversations were filled with politics, art, and big ideas. But emotions were another story. Feelings weren't forbidden, just postponed. There was always something bigger happening, something more urgent. She learned to be self-sufficient early, to downplay her needs, to smile for cameras and guests. How do you explain loneliness when you live in a house full of people? As she grew older, the weight of expectation shifted. Now it wasn't just about being seen, it was about becoming something worthy of the name. Every choice felt scrutinized, every misstep magnified. If she struggled, people assumed privilege would soften the blow. But privilege doesn't teach you how to be understood. It doesn't replace presence, and it certainly doesn't answer the question that kept echoing in her mind. Who am I, separate from him? For years, she protected the image. She told herself that speaking out would feel like betrayal, that acknowledging pain would somehow erase the love she still felt. But silence has a way of turning inward. It becomes anxiety, resentment, a quiet grief for the version of childhood you never had. And eventually, it demands honesty. When she finally spoke, she didn't accuse, she didn't attack. Instead, she described absence, emotional distance, the unspoken rule that the work always came first. She confirmed what many children of powerful figures feel but rarely admit, that success can be a wall as much as it is a bridge, and that being proud of a parent doesn't mean you weren't hurt by them. The reaction was immediate. Some people dismissed her words, saying she should be grateful. Others leaned in, recognizing pieces of their own stories in hers. Because this wasn't really about Rob Reiner. It was about the myth that achievement excuses everything else. It was about how easy it is to overlook the quiet damage when the public narrative is so loud. She ended her reflection with a pause. Then a question she said she still doesn't fully know the answer to. Can love and neglect coexist? Can someone give the world everything and still have nothing left when they come home? And if the truth is uncomfortable, does that make it any less true? Today, she says she's still healing, still redefining her relationship with her father, not as an icon, but as a human being. The awful truth, she confirmed, wasn't scandalous. It wasn't explosive. It was something far more unsettling. That sometimes, the deepest wounds aren't caused by cruelty, but by absence. And that telling the truth isn't about tearing someone down. It's about finally letting yourself be seen. So the question lingers. How many families are living versions of this story behind perfect facades, and how many truths are still waiting, just like she once did, in the doorway, hoping someone will finally turn around and notice?